When it comes to protests, it often only takes a small spark to ignite a massive movement. In the recent case of Iran, that spark may have been a leaked budget document. What started in late December as a small group angry over the government's handling of the economy quickly grew into a wave of protests across the country. At least 21 people are dead and hundreds more are in jail. To discuss what this means for the future of Iran, let's ask Besma Momani. She is professor of political science at the University of Waterloo and the Balsillie School of International Affairs, also a senior fellow at CIGI, the Center for International Governance Innovation, and Saeed Ranama, founding director of York University's School of Public Policy and Administration. And we're delighted to welcome you two back again for bad news. Not for good news, for bad news. Saeed, to you first. The recent protests in Iran. Tell us about the connection between those and this budget leak that came out some time ago.
Well, you know, actually, I do not make a big fuss about this leak budget because the items of budget were, in a sense, out. You know, what triggered it, actually, ironically, was a stage demonstration in Mashhad, organized by Friday Prayer of Mashhad, the holy city of Mashhad, whose son-in-law, who is the head of the largest religious foundation, lost presidency to Rouhani. So they staged it, but it got out of hand. Immediately others came out. You rightly said that it's sparks, but the sparks need an explosive situation which was brewing for a very long time. In the past year or so, there have been lots of work stoppages, you know, strikes, you know, workers, instead of government responding to the claims that the concerns of the workers that said that we have not been paid for months, you know. They took their leaders, they lashed them, you know, they put them in jail. Also, you have got unemployed youth, and then you have got these lower middle classes who left their meager savings in all of these fake Islamic trusts, you know, religious trusts that they had allowed to pop up, you know, as a result of deregulation, collecting all of these monies and then declaring bankruptcy. So you have got a wide variety of things, you know, and then led to this.
All right, but all that having been said, Besma, I do want you to follow up on this because the conventional wisdom certainly is that when this budget leak came forward, indicating how the theocracy and many of its members were, you know, exploiting their position at the expense of the people that Saeed has just been referring to, the conventional wisdom is that's the spark that got it going. Do you believe that?
Well, it's actually, I mean, I think as Saeed pointed out, yes, the protests in Mashhad, I think, were led by Raisi. I think they were definitely an attempt to basically embarrass the Rouhani government and, frankly, put the blame on Rouhani and the government's inability to get the economy growing. But I think what happened here is that Rouhani said, you know, wait a minute, I think I'm going to get you folks, the clerics, and expose you, because I think the leaks did come from the Rouhani branch of things, maybe not directly from his office, but some of his supporters.
So he was trying to embarrass the clerics.
Absolutely, because the clerics went after him. And remember, there's a succession issue here too. Yes. One of the succession issue is that Ayatollah Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of Iran, likely wants Raisi to be the next supreme leader. That's his protege. And some others want Rouhani to be the next supreme leader. So there's something even bigger here. And so each camp is trying to embarrass the other. And I think in Mashhad, the attempt was to put the focus on the government, because they're the ones that are actually supposed to be in charge of the budget and all the spending. And also, remember, signed that international nuclear deal that was supposed to deliver all those economic benefits.
With the Obama administration.
Absolutely. But Rouhani said, basically, wait a minute, I'm going to expose you for the billions of dollars that you spend on these religious establishments, these schools, these sermons, and even the IRGC, that's the Revolutionary Guard, that's having all of this, you know, reach in countries like Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and basically put a price tag to it. And that is what I think even made the population more frustrated.
Saeed, give us a sense of who's in the streets protesting.
You know, I mean, regardless of the fact that what triggered it, this is a genuine demonstration, a spontaneous demonstration of the people, despite the fact that either side blames the other side or also agents of Zionism, imperialism, and others. These are all nonsense. You know, this is an independent movement that started
genuinely
by
organic
movement by the people who were deprived of I mean, economically also, not only economically, also politically, culturally, and on all of these
So it's
problems.
certainly young people, but beyond that.
It's young people, but this time there is a difference even from the last time that Iran erupted in 2009. We have now more of the working poor, the deprived people, the lower middle classes, even compared to that. And this is the biggest blow to the regime, you know. And now the main problem is that, of course, the notion of budget, the information of budgets was more or less out, you know. I mean, people knew that because even if you go to the Farsi sites, you know, we see lots of references to this. What happens, of course, they knew that the parliament, the Majlis, will even add to the budget that Rouhani had arranged. The biggest item, of course, is for defense. I mean, we should not at the same time forget that Iran is in the middle of lots of conflicting situations outside, you know, and then despite the fact that its budget is not, military budget is not as outrageous as Saudi Arabia, which is 13%, it's only about 2.5%, but still, they wanted to add to the Pastaran, to the Islamic Guards, which have got the largest budget item even within the military establishment. Its budget is twice the budget of the regular Army, Navy, and Air Force, you know, so it's huge. But at the same time, there are many other problems that the regime is facing, you know, as a result of years and decades of mismanagement, corruption. Corruption is so widespread, and it goes back to the time of Ahmadinejad, who shrewdly allowed widespread corruption of all elements of hierarchy and kept on registering it. That's why...
Well, let me put another issue on the table here, and that is, you referenced it a second ago, the nuclear deal made by the previous American administration under Barack Obama and Iran. And here's, we're going to do a little excerpt here, Bestman. I'll get you to comment on this. This is Slate.com on how the protests are related to the Iran nuclear deal. While a majority of Iranians supported the 2015 nuclear deal, 70% said that the lifting of sanctions under the deal hadn't improved living conditions. Even a majority of those who voted for President Rouhani, who has promised to improve economic conditions by ending the country's economic isolation, agreed that the deal hadn't delivered for ordinary people and had mostly benefited those with political connections. I guess we need some better understanding of why this deal, which was supposed to alleviate sanctions somewhat and improve the economy in Iran somewhat, doesn't appear to have done that. What's your view? Two
things. One, the economy technically is growing. I mean, what's interesting here is when the sanctions were lifted, the economy grew by 12%. That's a really high number. Last year, 4% projected, this year, 6%. The challenge is it's not trickling down to the people, partly because these clerics are skimming off the top. That's a big problem here. I mean, in some of these socioeconomically disadvantaged areas that we're seeing these protests, youth unemployment is as high as 40%. That's double the average even in Tehran. So there is a real problem of trickle down. I think we talk about the clerics as a religious establishment. What's increasingly, I mean, it's always been known, but what's interesting about this budget item in terms of it being exposed, everybody's known that these are business people. They're not just religious, zealots. They're actually business people with enormous conglomerates, economic conglomerates that run the economy. And they're basically stifling growth in the economy. So that's part of the challenge. That's, I think, one part of it. The second is the great deal of hope had been that there would be international investment that come in. And that, yes, we've seen a little bit of that come in from the Europeans, but we know with so much ambivalence happening with the Americans at this, a lot of companies are kind of afraid to do business with the Iranians. I mean, we see Boeing, for example, which may lose 150,000 jobs worldwide, many of them in the United States, if this deal is canceled by the Trump administration. So there are a lot of companies that are hesitant about investing in Iran for fear that the sanctions will come back or that they'll have a difficult time, as we saw some German banks, for example, to be taken to court for their double dealing in Iran and externally and not being in convention with some of the American bilateral sanctions that still remain. So the economic investment is not coming into Iran. And also, we have a challenge that the Iranian economy is also, main exporter is oil. 85% of its budget is oil. And oil prices are not what they used to be.
Right.
They're still stagnating at 55, maybe 60 with this latest challenge that we've seen in Iran. per barrel. And when we look at the budgets, for example, they're forecasting or using the estimation of $75 a barrel. So we're not getting the oil prices up nearly as high as what the Iranian economy needs.
You know, I mean, we should take into consideration that actually we have got multiple states within Iran, you know. You have got the state run by the supreme leader, you have got one state by Rouhani, which is the regular government, and then you have got one state which is by religious and revolutionary foundations. These are controlling so many conglomerates, holdings, each of them in different areas. These are the confiscated properties from the time of the Shah, which continues up until today, you know.
And are these three states in conflict with one another?
They are, well, they are not. The main issue is that the latter one that I said, that they control, nobody knows exactly because there are no accounts of these, but it's estimated that about 40% of the Iranian economy is controlled by these corporations, which do not pay taxes. Parliament and government have no control over it, and this is all distributed among them. So there is a main structural problem within the regime that even if they want to reform it, they are confronted with these, you know, with these problems. And then, in addition to that, of course, sanctions still are there, you know. I mean, it's true that some money were released, you know, but still there are lots of people, because of push of the Americans, who hesitate from investing in Iran. That creates more problem. And then, at the same time, we have got other issues. The Iranian government itself is about 10% of the whole working population, you know. We have got close to 4 million civil servants and about close to 4.8 million retirees. So the biggest operative expense of the budget goes for these, you know. Then you have got the question of education. You've got the young population, you know, that about 30% of them are below 20. So all of these have created serious problem. You do not have one single authority who can say that you are responsible for this. It's a mess that continues, you know, because of all these conflicts.
Right. Because you're on social media, I want to ask you about the world's most famous tweeter. Here's the president. Big protests in Iran. The people are finally getting wise as to how their money and wealth is being stolen and squandered on terrorism. Looks like they will not take it any longer. The USA is watching very closely for human rights violations. And he went on to tweet again, Iran is failing at every level despite the terrible deal made with them by the Obama administration. The great Iranian people have been repressed for many years. They are hungry for food and for freedom. Along with human rights, the wealth of Iran is being looted. Time for change. Besma, who inside Iran is actually seeing these messages, if anyone?
Well, I mean, Iranians are online. I mean, this is a connected society, so they are reading this. And you know, I am on Twitter a lot and following many of even some of the Persian activists, and some are actually very happy with the comments that have come out of the president, but they see it as insincere, 100% insincere. This is not a man who's been good to the Iranian people. Specifically, you know, many people see the Muslim ban that he tried to impose as being actually directed toward them. I mean, as pointed out, the Iranians are very educated. They're quite cosmopolitan. Many of them are some of the most, you know, productive and intelligent people as either Iranian Americans or as even Iranians going to study in the United States. Some of the best universities
a lot of them
are
like
taking,
America, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that there is this feeling this is insincere, and also, I mean, there has been both between, you know, both the Americans to the Saudis to the Israelis beating the drum of war against Iran for quite some time now. So, you know, there is a great deal of ambivalence. And I have to say, people are often saying online that I've heard from activists inside the country, yes, thank you. I mean, we all want regime change, but we don't want it through a method like Syria. We don't want to go through the crisis of Iraq to get to that point. Save us from that. So there's no hunger for a military intervention, and absolutely not an American-inspired or directed one.
But I asked the question originally because from what I saw, the Iranian regime had attempted to shut down some social media sites. And I wonder how successful they were at preventing the message from going out by doing that.
Well, you know, the Iranian people are smarter than the regime. I mean, they're using VPNs, they're using ways of going around it. But look, absolutely, there has been, I've noticed already, the number of videos that have come out have decreased in the past few days. That's partly because they've issued statements that anybody who's seen videotaping may be arrested. I mean, so there is a crackdown. And intermittently, yes, the internet's been on and off. Telegram, which they use far more than Twitter, has been turned on and off. So there is some attempts. And they're also very interestingly trying to calibrate this, because one of the things that the Iranian regime learned from the Egyptian revolution is that if you turn everything off, you know what happens? People go to the streets even more to find out what's going on. So the last thing you want to do is actually shut everything off. So they're calibrating it very carefully, and the Iranian people are smart enough to get around it.
What do you think the impact of the president's tweets have been?
Well, I think Iranians, even if they read it, many of them do, I don't think they care, you know, or the Iranians, I can say, not only, there is this enemy triangle of the regime from outside.
Who's in the triangle?
The triangle is Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, and then Donald Trump of here. I have always said that anything these people say or do will harm the movement. They are the least respected people inside, you know, particularly Mr. Trump, you know. And this is the problem. Anything that they say will really give lots of momentum to the militarists who want to take over.
But Said, if they don't say anything, they'll be criticized for ignoring a potential revolutionary front within the country.
You know, but these three, you know, are so well known that I don't think any Iranian, you know, and Iranians are very intelligent people, they would take, as Basma rightly said, that they do not consider these people as sincere, so that they care about human rights or democracy or anything. The main danger is that we allow the religious, the Revolutionary Guards, you know, which already are controlling almost everything. They become even more powerful, and already they are using this. They are, you know, this regime it went through a process after the revolution. First, it was a clerical oligarchy when they got rid of all the secularists who started the revolution. Then, during the Iran-Iraq war, became clerical military oligarchy, and after that, during Rafsanjani and others, became clerical military and business oligarchy. And now this oligarchy is so closely knit together, it's so powerful. And in addition, they have got so many apparatuses of suppression, ideological, and they have still some millions of people who are linked to all these religious foundations, and they're supporting. That's why they keep on bringing them. And they have always boasted that we have support of the people. And now we argue that if you really genuinely think that you have the support of people, why don't you agree for a referendum? You put a referendum, you know, because they are losing even support from their own basis, you know, and they know it. That's why they are very upset with it. Even the name of the referendum makes them very angry, you know.
Okay, let's come home. What, if anything, should or can Canada do to influence the events in Iran today?
That's a great question, and you know, you alluded to it. It's a balancing act, right? I mean, saying nothing is not appropriate. I mean, you have to say something to support the protesters, to point out that absolutely their human rights record inside Iran is abysmal. You know, the country's foreign policy is awful. I mean, one can go on all day. Canada should say something in support of those protesters, asking the Iranian government to be, you know, to hold back, to show restraint, to not, you know, crack down on peaceful demonstrators. All of that, that's great.
I want to know if that matters, though. I mean, Chrystia Freeland, the Foreign Affairs Minister, actually did make a statement in solidarity with. Do people on the ground care about that kind of thing?
You know what? I think it really does matter to them. Okay. You know, that sort of support, it feeds them, it nourishes them, and it also, frankly, protects them. I mean, we see this even from political prisoners who have been in you know, Evin prison, and I've heard it many a times from them. When they heard that that their plight is on, you know, whether it's Jason Rezaian and other people who were arrested by the regime, when they know that their plight is on international media, it makes sure that they're treated better, that they're cared for. It's important to say something. Okay. But to think that, you know, somehow this is going to be, you know, the tipping point and the regime is going to, you know, or we're going to make some real change in the direction of this. No. Let's be honest with ourselves. Yeah.
You know, I think you're right. You know, I differentiate between what Canada or European Union says and Trump and that triangle say. You know, I think the people actually of Iran expect that governments such as these would support it, and particularly that now Iran is trying to re-enter Canada. You know, through this embassy. You know, Canadian government can make any improvement with the relationship conditional on the release of prisoners. So far, they have inside Iran they have declared 1,700 people have been detained only on these in the last week, in addition to all the political prisoners that they have. So the release of prisoners, respecting human rights. This is one thing, and there is another thing. You know, Canada has become safe haven of many of these people who have stolen money and have ended up with their capital here, you know. And the situation when gets worse, you know, you will get more of these people coming to Canada. Canada should prevent this from happening, prevent Canada becoming a safe haven for all these thieves.
Then let's look a little further afield. If Saeed's triangle of interveners are completely useless here, and if Canada, you know, it's good to hear us, but frankly, we're not all that important, is there any actor on the world stage today who could be involved in this and have a positive contribution to make?
I mean, the European Union really is, I think, the one all the analysts are looking for to comment and to be the voice of reason. Also, not just because, you know, not to put the European Union on some pedestal here, normative or such, but more importantly, that's where the future investment in Iran is going to be, and that the regime cares about. At the end of the day, Rouhani and even the clerics, I believe, do want to make sure, because this is regime survival, that the economy does well. So they need European investment. It's not going to come from the Americans because, frankly, American laws are so complex that they're not going to be able to, even with a JCPOA deal, you know, the international nuclear deal, all of that, it still makes it very difficult for regulations in terms of American businesses to invest.
Can I understand this, though? You think that if you know, Chancellor Merkel or the President of France, Macron, were to say something as in, stop beating up these people in the streets, that would have an impact?
I think that if they say that, look, because they know, or I should say the regime knows, that the European Union are in support of the deal. They're the only ones keeping this together, frankly, at the international level, because we know the Americans want to squash it. So yes, I think if they say, look, we are going to be your future investors, we are the ones that are going to be helping your economy grow, this is your regime survival, you make sure that the Evin prison isn't overcrowded, you make sure that you stick to the Geneva Conventions, let go of peaceful protesters, absolutely, it makes a difference.
Okay.
And may I just add?
I've got 20 seconds left.
I mean, in addition to that, you know, we need the support of the progressive people, because what is happening in Iran, we have got this movement, but the movement has no leadership, has no organization. No movement can survive without a front, you know. And unfortunately, Iranian opposition is so divided. And so far as we have this division, the regime can survive. The only way to confront it is that all Iranian oppositions get together, you know, and then confront something. You know, even in Canada, you know, there have been lots of demonstrations gathering, you know, by different groups of people. They are not even getting together to do something against the regime.
We appreciate both of you coming into TVO tonight, sharing your views on this. Besma Mohammadi from CG and the University of Waterloo and the Balsali School, and Saeed Rahnama, the founding director of the School of Public Policy Administration, York University. Good to see you both. Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.